Go to a town hall and scream at your Republican senator.
You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 111 for May 24th, 2017. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about bear's ears, saving places we care about, and social responsibility. So go call your congressman because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. All right, welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today are everyone, including Stephen in Calgary.
Hello.
Sonia in Utah, or should I say Denver International Airport.
Yeah, hello.
Bill in Arizona.
Good morning.
Chris in Oregon.
Hi.
And Doug in Scotland.
Hey.
All right, so like I said, we've got everybody on today. Sonia's going to be in and out, and just so you know, you'll hear some noise in the background of her recording because she's got, she's sitting at an airport terminal doing a podcast, and that is what we call dedication. So, okay, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things today because we've kind of got a hodgepodge of topics that I've seen collecting on Facebook and different areas. And maybe some of these will turn into a whole show. Maybe it'll turn into a whole show today. I don't know. We'll see what we get to. But one of the first things we're going to talk about, since this episode is coming out on May 17th and there's still time to do something about it, is Bears Ears National Monument. Okay, and a little bit about social responsibility, and I'll get into what that means a little bit later. So, Bears Ears is a national monument in Utah, I believe, and there's been some talk about it and some controversy about it for a long time now, at least since the end of last year. And I'll be honest, I haven't really followed a lot about what's going on with this, and this is a great reason why we do a podcast like this and talk about things like this, so we can at least mention it, and you can go do some research. We'll have some links in the show notes, and you can maybe get involved and see what's going on. Stephen, you posted an article to me. Did you have a chance to take a look at that at all and see what the current action around Bears Ears is for anybody listening to this podcast, not 2 years from now, but this week, on the week of May 17th? So maybe there's something they can do about it?
On a broader level, not just Bears Ears, but several national monuments are being reviewed by the Department of Interior per President Trump to, basically, I guess, to see if they're going to still remain national monuments or not. Bears Ears, because it's such a high, is just kind of a contentious issue. They for some reason, the response period for review for public input is much shorter. It's only like 2 weeks from last Friday, I think. Whereas for the others, I think they get a full month of public review period.
Uh-huh.
So this, as far as I know, this will be the only CRM Archaeology podcast that we'll be able to put out before the public response period ends. So I thought, as far as a cultural resources issue, that this really kind of falls within our purview. Unfortunately, I'm in Canada. I barely am aware of what any of this stuff is about, except I've looked around a little bit, and I've looked at the actual Department of Interior list of monuments that are currently under review, and we'll have that link in the show notes. But also, there was the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, and from their website, it looks like they were the 5 tribes looking to set that up, or they were proponents for the initial making it a monument, but now it's kind of like reactivated to basically save our monument, right?
Mm-hmm.
And judging from that website, some interesting overviews over what the Bears Ears Monument is, what some of the potential threats are, looting, mining, that sort of thing. They have some pretty spectacular photographs of archaeological sites, including intact ceramics just sitting there. And as far as I'm concerned, and for this podcast, I don't have a lot to say because I don't know all the um, the details. But it's definitely something that, as a CRM archaeologist, you should be concerned about this. This is a cultural resources and preservation issue, and it behooves all of us, including those of us living in Canada, um, to to look into this and perhaps contribute to the public review. And I thought I'd toss this over at Sonia because being from Utah, it's more local, and she probably has better insight into what the public reactions have been and maybe what some of the issues are.
Yeah, sure. So Bears Ears National Monument was designated last year. It was one of the last things that President Obama did before he left office. It's centered in San Juan County, which is the southeasternmost county in the state of Utah. It borders up against Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico, if the Four Corners region, essentially. And the monument's a little over 1.3 million acres in area. So it's Bears Ears itself is actually just a pair of mesas or buttes, but it's a traditional cultural property for several tribes in that area. And the coalition is, as you said, five tribes. It's the Navajo, the Uinta and Ouray, or the Ute, yeah, Uinta and Ouray Ute reservation. They're centered out of Vernal, Utah, which is up in the northeastern part of the state. The Zuni, the Hopi, and the Ute Mountain Ute, which are actually covered in mostly in Colorado. So uh, they're concerned, obviously, because this is a traditional cultural property for them. It's got thousands and thousands of archaeological sites associated with it, and it's being managed by both the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. So this area is obviously one of the most dense cultural resources area in the state of Utah, as well as, I mean, it's not in Colorado, but Colorado is also pretty dense for cultural resources in that area. I can speak less for Arizona and New Mexico, but I do know that there are quite a few archaeological sites up there. The biggest issue that's going on right now is the state legislature and the governor are kind of downing on the establishment of this national monument, um, in part because they feel like it's going to hurt business. And by business, we're not talking about visits like recreational or that sort of thing. We're talking about, or tourism. We're talking about mining, oil and gas, agriculture, and ranching. Now, some things to consider would be San Juan County is 85-ish% tribal. And the legislature is telling us that most people in the county or in that region do not want this national monument because it feels like it would hurt business. So we're talking about a legislature that's saying something completely different than this coalition of 5 tribes. And if 85% of the county is tribal, whose voices are being heard louder or more? You know what I mean? And so the tribes themselves are feeling like, well, hey, we're not being listened to. What about our voice? We're independent nations. Why aren't we being respected here? And they have a lot of support from the community. So, for example, the city of Moab, there's a lot of positive response and feedback coming out of the residents of Moab. But the state and the state legislature and the governor are not listening to that. They're listening to business. So here we have the difference between business and what makes money versus recreation and tourism and traditional cultural properties for the tribes. Whose voices are most important?
Yeah, I gotta follow up on that because it's not. I have seen the arguments I have seen for Bears Ears have all been, for making it a national monument, have all been from the tribal standpoint, which is completely valid and should be enough. But it seems to me like there's so much more too. I mean, Bears Ears is an amazing place. I've never been there, but I've looked at a tons of pictures on it, and it looks like it's just an amazing place that needs to be preserved just for those reasons alone. I mean, even if there were nothing else to do that for. But the question is, we have so much land in this country, and this one tiny fraction of land, when you look at the entire United States, and we're talking about, oh, should we or should we not make this a national monument? What is the economic value of it besides the what is the business value to that land? Is there oil under there? What are people trying to get at? What is the main argument that people are trying to make for business? What's the thing there? Do you know, Sonia?
Well, we've got quite a bit of oil and gas down there. It's in I think there's an anticline, or is it it's an anticline that's down there, so that caps off quite a bit of oil and gas. There's a lot of gas pipeline, seismic activity that goes on in that area. We've also got uranium mining down there, as well as ranching. Huge, very, very big issue down there. And of course, if you've got yourself a national monument, they have to limit the number of animals per acre in terms of ranching and leasing. And that, of course, causes problems for people trying to winter their cattle in one area and then transfer them to another area, and what kind of damage we have to soil resources, the geologic resources, paleontological resources, which we also have in that area. And then, I mean, if you were including business, you're also talking about tourism. Utah is huge for tourism.
For sure.
And it brings in quite a bit of money. But if you start looking at some of the things that have started happening in Utah over the last 6 months, I think like the Outdoor Retailers Conference is usually centered in Salt Lake City, Utah every year, brings in millions and millions and millions of dollars to Salt Lake and the surrounding areas. And this year, the governor and the legislature have basically said, nope, take off, hosers. We don't want you here. So the Outdoor Retailers Conference left, which has of course pulled a lot of money out of Utah. So tourism is becoming less of from my perspective anyway. Tourism, the state of Utah has kind of been built around that as an important economic resource, but it's becoming less of an issue to oil, gas, and mining, and other ranching, especially in southern Utah. Now, right. I could be spouting off the wrong information here, but from our perspective, up in the north, that's what's going on, and that's what we're observing. And the tribes' voices, I feel, are not being adequately represented here. I mean, they will say that they'll go sit down with the tribes and that the tribes are against the monument. I mean, we've heard that out of our legislature. And the tribes are not saying that.
Yeah.
The vast majority of them are saying, no, this is an important resource to us.
Well, that's not a surprise, and that's why I think that we have a history of not listening to tribes, of saying we're going to do that and then not listening to tribes. That's kind of like the least shocking part of this whole entire conversation is that the tribes are saying, hey, wait a minute, and everybody else is turning the other way, or saying they're going to do something and then not. So I feel like us as non-tribal members, we need to if that's just not going to work, if that's an argument that is not going to work with our politicians, then we need to come up with other arguments. And there's plenty of other arguments. It's not just tribal concerns why we should do that. Like I said, it should be enough, but it doesn't seem like it is. So one of the things you can try to help do, although I have concerns over whether this kind of thing actually works. I'd love to see some historical data on that, but signing petitions and things like that, and we'll get into that a little later. But we have a link in the show notes to sign the petition for Bears Ears, the Bears Ears Coalition. So check that out. It takes 2 seconds. If it helps, it helps. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
I'd like to add something to that, Chris.
Yeah.
Signing a petition is a very passive way to have your say. And you need, if this is important to you, like it is important to the tribes, that coalition of 5 tribes in the South. If this is important to you, please call the state legislature and make your voice heard. They need to hear it from you. They need to hear it from all sides. Signing a petition, like honestly, it's too passive.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are given an opportunity to comment, like you are for the next, I think, 10 to 15 days on this resource, you need to make your comments constructive. You need
Yeah.
to say, I am objecting to this for the following reasons. One, and then list it out. Do not get emotional about it. Get factual. The
Mm-hmm.
resources encompasses this area, and it is important for these reasons. Two, and make sure you cite information. Now, this sounds like you have to write a paper, and it's not. That's not the case. But when one of the things that we don't hear a lot about the NEPA process is that all comments have to be addressed. And if your comment is, I object to this, their response is, okay, what do you object to? Since you're non-specific, how much is that actually going to, how are they going to actually take time to address your objection? Or are they just going to go, okay, objection, one, vague?
Yeah.
You have to be specific. So, and sometimes it's even more important to call your legislatures or call the legislature and representatives more than once. So, for example, if you're going to call your state representative and say, I have an issue, give them one reason why you have an issue, then hang up and call back and give them the next issue, because then your voice is heard 5, 6, 7 times instead of just once.
Yeah.
Take 20 minutes, do what you have to do, and make each individual issue heard. So each individual issue has to be addressed. Don't get emotional about it. Get logical, support your evidence. That's why we went to college, to be able to protect these resources.
Mm-hmm.
You know what to do.
Yeah, and on that note, if the politicians who are, suggesting that you strip Bears Ears of its monument status, if they're not listening to the reasoning of tourism as a value or native voice as a value, and if they're thinking solely in terms of economic value for industry, then their ears are being bent by these robber barons who are miners and ranchers, and the only people profiting from that are miners and ranchers. That money is not going to support the local economy or even the state economy. And so if you want to speak in that language, Patagonia and REI have provided a lot of comments talking about how the outdoor recreation industry is a $4.6 billion industry. And that is something that is really in the blind spot of a lot of these politicians who are obsessing over industry, especially extractive industries. And ecotourism is, in fact, leaps and bounds more profitable than extractive industry. So that's one of those things, just check out Patagonia and REI. And when you're making these calls to your senators, just read off what they've said as your comment.
They've done a lot of the research for you. The more comments that your senators and your governor and just everybody receives specific to each one of those issues, provided with research and supporting information, is another hoop that they have to jump through in order to delist.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to provide as many hoops as possible for them to jump through on this.
Right.
Assuming you support keeping it as a national monument.
Right. All right. So we're going to go to break, but we'll pick this up on the other side of the break in just a minute. Back in a second. This episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast is made possible by Codify Incorporated. Codify is a California benefit corporation that can help you with your digital archaeological needs. Visit codify.com today to find out how Codify can help you go paperless in 2017. That's www.codify.com. Now back to the show. All right, we're back. And just to mention, I mentioned that the BearsEarsCoalition.org website was a petition. It's not a petition. That was my fault because it looks like one. They've got numbers up there. Makes it seem that way. But what they say is you're signing a statement that they've created. And if you agree with that statement, you click on the button and then you can add your information to that statement. And you can add a personal note to that statement as well. And they're sending those comments to the Secretary of the Interior as part of the public commenting period. So like I said, if you're listening to this in current time frame, It's May 17th, 2017. Then you have time to do that. If you're listening to this a year from now, hopefully you're listening to it from your cabin at Bears Ears National Monument. Otherwise, Doug, you had a comment from the last segment.
Yeah, my comment is I actually find this to be quite scary for the Trump organization, mainly because, let's face it, the clown show that is the White House has done so many ham-fisted things, and this is actually going through the normal, I guess you'd say, the normal processes that governments would go through to do stuff. So if anyone else other than Trump was doing this, this is the process they would do, which means they might already have decided on the outcome. Whereas if this was, something that Trump personally felt strongly about, we know that there'd be an executive order and some sort of signing ceremony where they, I don't know, desecrate some Native American stuff in front of everyone on the TV just because. But this is actually going through the process of having a petition. And see, the designated national monument is a power given to the president. And in theory, if Trump wanted to, he could actually shrink the size of it. Legally, most people agree that once you've created a national monument, it's probably almost impossible to get rid of it unless it's an act by Congress. And so once you've created it, it's probably there until Congress says it's not. But the president can change the size of it. And so this whole review of, it's the last 20 years of all national monuments made since, I think, one at the end of, they picked one sort of period, I think it was like 1997 when Clinton made one, and they're reviewing 20 years worth of monuments. And they don't actually have to do this review. If Trump wanted to, he could shrink down the size of the national monument to, I don't know, 1 square meter. He could make it non-existent if he wanted to. And so that's the part that's kind of scaring me is our normal expected behavior of Trump is he would actually just decide it's Wednesday and he wants to shrink down Bears Monument down to an acre or something like that. And he could do that. And that is, there's some debate. He'd probably get sued about it because some laws have changed and the president hasn't done that in like 40 years or so. But if he really wanted to, he could just shrink it down to the point where it's pointless. And that's why I'm a bit scared about this, is they're actually going through the motions of doing a review as opposed to the sort of ham-fisted, I'm going to make a decision, which kind of, I don't know what your guys' thoughts on it, but it means that they're becoming more professional, which means they might actually get more done.
Right.
And that more done means, loosening the laws and destroying protection for natural and cultural heritage, at least in my opinion and what I see.
I'm going to disagree a little bit. I think that.
Well, Stephen, wait. You know that was Doug speaking, not me. You don't have to disagree. Just say it. But go ahead.
Yeah, no. I think the reason that this is doing what Doug was calling like this is a professional way of going about it. It is because that, if I remember right, this is in reaction to an executive order where Trump ordered the review of national monuments. And let's be honest, he might not have even known exactly what this executive order meant.
He was just eating cake and he got confused about something.
Yeah, somebody handed him an executive order, and it's like, great, let's do it. But basically what it does is it orders the review of national monuments. And so at that point, it goes to the Department of Interior, and, they still are an agency, and those guys have been in the agency for quite a while. And so, within the agency themselves, they're like, well, there's a process for doing this, and here's what we have to do. It might even be, and I'm completely speculating. But it could even be that people in the Department of Interior aren't in favor of this and are doing the public comment as a little bit of foot dragging. But they are reacting to it in like Doug was saying, it's the way that an agency should would be doing this, and you know this is that agency's way of reacting to the executive order.
But don't you find that just a little bit scary? I mean, it's professional, whereas if you wanted to, because I mean, it is effectively the president can make any monument they want, and in the past they have shrunk it. I think maybe it was Taft cut one in half. The size of it, stuff like that. Why go through the professional part of the review when they could just ask Trump?
No,
Why don't
actually,
you?
I find the opposite scary. I find the idea that Trump would just shrink it down without public review. That's the frightening part. At least with public review, you have a chance of having your opinion tossed in. Whether anybody listens to it or not, that's a completely different subject. But I think that having it being professional and at least having a certain amount of public input, that actually is somewhat reassuring. I mean, which like none of I mean, in the way that like the actual idea of like let's get rid of these monuments is not reassuring at all. But at least that they are maintaining some degree of uh, professional process in there.
Well, so the part where I find scary is because no matter what happens, whatever decision they make, there is probably going to be a lawsuit. Okay, sorry, maybe they decide to keep all the national monuments, and then there won't be a lawsuit. But if they decide to shrink them, or they decide to get rid of them, there will definitely be a lawsuit. Lots of organizations, Sierra Club, they've all lined up saying they're going to sue if anything happens. Um, and the part I find scary is if you do a public comment, that takes away a ground to sue. So it becomes professional. It makes it more easy because if it was just an executive order to shrink it, there would be a million lawsuits. It would take years, and effectively, it would go all the way to probably past Trump's term in office, and then the next president would just drop it. But
Well,
by doing
the problem
this,
though, the problem there though is that a lawsuit is not necessarily a guarantee of stay of action, right?
in this case, it would delay the ability for them to shrink it for probably years. But
I'm not sure that's true. Um, because the court would have to agree to a stay, and that doesn't always happen. And I'm sure should get a lawyer on here, but I'm sure there's like legal reasons why or why not you can have a stay of action, but I don't know what that criteria is, or what can lead a judge to either do it or not do it.
all right, fair enough. There may not stay it, but there would definitely be a legal action that would keep most everything in limbo, and probably that legal limbo would keep most of those areas protected. In that, if people were going to say try to drill on that land, which would be much much harder if it was a national monument, there's this risk of this lawsuit. So they could invest, and all of a sudden the lawsuit's decided, and then they lose that lease and are no longer able to drill. So I think even if there's not a stay, you would still be able to significantly slow down development in those areas because no one really wants to take that legal risk of suddenly investing a lot of money and losing it because of a lawsuit. Um, Though I would say they probably Sierra Club has really good lawyers. They would be able to get a stay, but I think a lawsuit would keep it in limbo for a lot longer. And one of the ways you could do a lawsuit is say there wasn't public consultation. But now they're doing that public consultation and are very hurried. 15 days to comment, and what is it? 30 days for the other ones? Does anyone know
Yeah,
how
I
many days
think
it is?
that sounds right. Yeah,
Yeah,
something like that.
that's just enough to tick that box. And then you know hopefully, I mean, there is always the risk that 90% of the people that respond say we don't want it. But you can still move ahead, even if most people say they don't want it, by just saying we've done it. And look, there's a couple of people who support it.
But let's get some other comments on this. Bill, you had something on this.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys are finally here with me because growing up in Idaho, these kind of ideas about, the government and takings and all that stuff, that's just what your bread and butter. You learn that from elementary school. I mean, the reason why he'd follow the actual process is not some kind of savvy or, some kind of evolution in their strategy that they actually are realizing that they can get things done by actually following the system. It's striking at the heart of something that his opponents actually care about. So all the people who are against him care about public lands. They care about open spaces and things like cultural heritage more than they care about things like drilling for oil. So this is a good way to distract a whole bunch of their time and money on this scheme that, like you said, he could just make an executive order and just be done with it and then start the lawsuits. Instead, he opens up this whole comment period so that we can all spend all our time spending using our breath on podcasts and other strategies like this, so that we don't actually pay any attention to the fact that he hasn't appointed a whole bunch of the people that we need to run this country, and the fact that he's renting out pieces of Trump Tower by the government, and the fact that the investigation between his relationships between his campaign and Russia is continuing on. I mean, it just is a smoke and mirrors. We look the different direction, and it makes us think he's following the rules, but in all fairness, he's doing what he wants anyway, and this just distracts us.
Which is a lot smarter than anything he's done in the past.
Well, I don't know. His whole thing has been amazingly smart. He's done an excellent job as far as this whole campaign. He's gotten all the stuff that he wants. The cards are all stacking up in his favor right now. And we are all running around dismayed like we don't know what to do because he's not acting like a normal politician. That's stunning and shocking to us. And we're trying to do all our political action stuff to counteract what he's doing. But I think that the guy is brilliant, and he has other people that are, just as smart, if not smarter. And we all think that they're dumb because they don't comply with our beliefs or the way that we think. But as far as what they do, they're doing a great job.
Oh, I disagree. I think they're doing out of name one thing that they've managed to act. So, okay, they've managed to roll back using a sort of loophole law, a lot of the regulations for the last year of Obama. They appointed a Supreme Court justice, which, that was basically going to happen no matter what. But they've actually done almost nothing.
The goal is not for them to do those political things. The goal is for them to shovel money into their pockets. Look at the stock market. Look at the fact that house prices are going up, the stock market's going up, but none of our wages are going up. I mean, they're doing it. It's working for them. They're not supposed to run the government or manage or do any of that other stuff that an actual politician would do.
Okay,
He's doing this.
Let's bring this down. This could really devolve into a politics podcast, which I know that we should be talking about these things. But what I want to talk about real quick, I want to get some ideas from you guys in the last 3 minutes here. What do you guys think are some actual things that people can do that actually mean something? For me, one of the things that I feel like we do is that actually provides value to the world as a whole, just in changing people's mindsets and thinking about things constantly, is actually doing all these podcasts. The Archaeology Podcast Network brings information into people's head on a daily basis. And I think that might be one of the reasons our current political climate, one of the reasons why our listenership has more than doubled, almost tripled in the past 9 months. I don't think that's a mistake. I think that's why these things are happening. But what do you think we can do? Because the group Archaeologists for a Just Future renamed themselves that after Trump was elected and said, we're going to do this, and ACRA had a webinar, and we're going to do this and that, and we're going to do these things. But then nothing was actually done. We marched for science. What did that do? Got a bunch of people outside. Sounds great, but did anybody pay attention? What are some things we can actually do that aren't petitions and marches for sciences, because nobody seems to care about those things, that actually the people we're talking to doesn't seem to work? So what are some things we can actually do to get people out there? Stephen, you were the
So,
first to comment, or Bill,
uh,
keep on rolling if you want.
no, I mean, I'm not going to take thunder away from Steven, but all I was going to say is these big actions like Bears Ears are difficult for individual communities to pull off. But it is not difficult for you to get the money together to buy a house or to buy some kind of farm or some kind of building that matters to your local heritage. Just straight up buy it and then remove it from uh, any kind of ability to be developed or destroyed or tampered with. The second thing that you can do is try to create local laws in your town, even your subdivision level, local codes that they try to benefit historic preservation, because historic preservation rules were built around the idea that private individuals would purchase properties, bounded geographic entities, and there would be incentives and penalties to changing those from their historical character. That's the way it was designed, and that's the way it still exists. So really, that's where you can go. See if you can get money together to get a down payment on an old house that's historical, that's associated with someone who played a role in your local history, and then use whatever laws that exist to benefit the improvement or rehabilitation of that property, and try to keep that in some kind of a trust so that it can't be developed. And if there are not rules that actually help you, try to push for your local congressman, alderman to get these rules to help you.
Yeah, that's good. And I think we've got some more ideas coming, but instead of going over, let's just take our last break really quick, and we'll be back shortly to wrap up this podcast.
This is Christopher Sims, host of the Go Dig a Hole podcast. It's a show geared for early career archaeologists where I bring interviews and casual panel discussions about the challenges and opportunities that many archaeologists encounter starting off. So, if you're still in school, thinking about going back, just getting started, or want to take the next step, you'll find what you need to go dig a hole. Tune in every other week on the Archaeology Podcast Network.
All right, we're back for our final segment, and Stephen, I think you had a comment near the end there regarding some things you think we can do. Go ahead.
Yeah, and actually, as Bill was talking, I ended up with a couple of comments. First, to talk about what Bill was mentioning, I don't know how feasible it is to, for us to be like, let's purchase up all the historic properties. At least, most of us who listen to this podcast, we're all archaeologists, and our ability to afford to afford historic properties and maintain the expenses of upkeep, that's not easy for us to do. But my initial flag of comment actually goes back to when you were talking, Chris. You're talking about individual things like the March for Science and the that particular Facebook page and stuff like that, and discussing that, like on a what did these things accomplish? And I think the answer, the way they have to take these is that they don't, unless it's a specific action that we're taking. Like in this case, we're all talking about doing the public comment for these various national monuments and the Bears Ears in particular. Beyond that, a lot of these don't have a set, you will do this one thing. Like the March for Science was not a, in support of any given specific scientific legislation or action or anything like that. It is in a broad perspective of we're doing, a pro-science perspective that all these people think science is important and across the board for various different policies and various different issues, and I think that those type of actions are very useful because they keep the visibility going. That the whole concept of uh, like, because everybody talks about how, like, Trump's just doing all these things to wear us down. I think that this is our response, is that we're here, we're doing all these things, and maintaining a vocal majority, let's say. um because I think that the case can be made that it's actually the majority, but you're remaining vocal, you're remaining visible, and that it provides, I don't know, drag on them trying to push through the things that they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump has made several comments to that, and it's like, oh well, I didn't realize it'd be this hard, or I didn't realize, and the reason is because when he's sitting in his echo chamber, the Oval Echo Chamber, and and he doesn't, he thinks that, oh well, we'll just do this and it'll help us, and it'll be great, and the realization that it's not, that there are going to be quite a few people who disagree, and push back. Um it, it, that's like the message that needs to get reinforced.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not a fast game. It is a slow game. We're playing baseball here, a lot of innings of baseball, and we're not playing the home run game either. We're doing the whole, like, just singles, nothing but singles.
Right.
And the sad part is, and the reason we're doing it this way is that's what we can do.
I agree with that. National politics is all about chipping away. It's hard to make a big punch in something so massive. I totally get that. And I think Sonia mentioned in the comments some of the things that we can do that are those smaller chip away things are local politics, getting into local politics. And even though people have a bad taste in their mouth when they say, ooh, gross politics, but that's why we have a whole bunch of Republicans and business people in politics right now, because they say, oh, yay, politics. So they do it. And at the local level, it's tough to get people into that job because they just want to do their research. They want to write papers. They want to do their things. They're scientists. They want to keep doing that, but they don't realize the kind of social responsibility of electing one of those people to say, hey, let's take a hit for the team and put you in office, and or somebody just deciding to do that. So, Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, along those lines, you're not looking at, like, everyone wants sort of an easy win, but you're actually looking at like 100-year, a 200-year effort we're talking about here, which may seem daunting, but it is one of those things. And if people are looking for stuff to do, a lot of it is actually going and talking to your friends and going and talking to strangers, other people you don't know, and trying to convince them of it. Because obviously everyone's going, oh, we need to go talk to our elected representatives. And yes, they're important. Really, they're elected, so they work on the whims of people and the opinions. And if we suddenly switched so that 90% of the U.S. population thought that historical preservation was important, this wouldn't be an issue. And it's really sort of ground up, and it really is just tons upon tons of talking to a lot of people and convincing them to change their opinions. And it can take decades to do that, but you really are looking for people to do that.
Yeah. Sonia, you're about to get on a plane. Final comments?
I am. Yeah, I want to. Earlier, I mentioned a little bit about being very passive when we just sign off on these petitions. Now, we're mice right now, okay? We're quiet little squeaky mice sneaking around in the background, not doing much, maybe doing a little damage here and there, okay? And I'm going to speak in a lot of figurative little metaphors here, okay? We need to go out and, like, the March for Science, that the number of attendees on that was dwarfed by the March for, like, the Women's March and the March for Life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If we can go out and get our fellow scientists involved in this, basically put together an army of big rats and then roll tide like Secret of NIMH style.
Nice.
We need to actually, like I said, metaphors here. We need to get bigger. Archaeology, we like to say that we're small, but we're 12,000 people in the United States alone. We're not talking about Canada. We're not talking about Europe. We're talking about 12,000 professional archaeologists in the United States that work professionally in archaeology. That's very, very small number. And if you assume that just a tiny number of us are actually commenting on it, we're not making it too much of a difference. Doing a little bit, but we're not doing enough. We've got to get the larger scientific society or group or organizations involved in this, get their investment, and get hundreds of thousands of signatures, hundreds of thousands of comments. The federal government cannot legally ignore comments coming with legitimate response with cited supporting evidence. Don't get onto these things and say, I just disagree because.
Right.
Tell them why. Call your senators. Be active about it. Don't be passive. And that is so hard for us as scientists because we are, I don't know, innately quiet. I don't want to say quiet people because we're not quiet, but we're very just kind of indirect, and we lay back in the background and say, oh, someone else is going to take care of it. Well, I'll tell you what, right now, the feds are trying to take care of this monument. They're trying to take care of, what is it, another 25 or something monuments in the United States. It's not just Bears Ears, okay? It's everything else. We need to get together and make a difference, and we can't do that alone.
That's right. And Sonia, thank you for your comments in case you have to drop off and get on your plane. We'll see you. Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for that.
All right, thanks. All right, bye, guys.
Thanks, Sonia. I'll just say to Sonia's mice comment, we are mice, but mice took down most of Europe a few hundred years ago, so it's not impossible. Maybe we need to hit the master reset button. I don't know. Anyway, see who ends up on top.
I can totally still hear you guys. You know that, right?
yeah, I know.
Just stop brushing your teeth, and that'll do it. All right.
That's right. Doug.
Yeah, actually, I'm not even sure we really need to get that big. I'll take the example of Texas. Almost every year they try to introduce a bill to legalize arrowhead collecting on waterways, which would be federal and state land. And every year the Texas Archaeology Society, which may not be their name, I can't remember the exact name, they show up to go to Austin. There's maybe 50 or 60 of them. They show up to the committee meeting and they get the bill killed each and every year because it's literally a couple of people versus dozens. And you don't actually need to have a march of 1 million people. You could just have a couple of dozen people show up to the right committee meetings, and that actually gets a lot done.
Yeah, indeed. I don't know what I have to say on this, honestly. After we've had all these comments, I'm just hoping that we get some actual things done as a result of this and some other actions and some things like that. Anybody else have any final comments on this to wrap up?
Yeah, I think that the takeaway is that it's going to take political action, and civic engagement is being branded by mainstream liberals right now as like hashtag the resistance, but it's just a duty. It's an obligation. And I think one of the great things that's happened in the past 100 days is that more and more people are becoming active in their politics and taking ownership over this. And so, it's just like Doug said, it's just like Bill said, it's just like we've covered throughout this whole thing. You've got to show up. You've got to, be aware of what is on the table, what kind of bill somebody's trying to pass, and, go through the legal channels and just jam them up and make them stop. And, that's just basically it, get active. That's what it's going to take.
Indeed. Well, I think that the podcasts like this, as we mentioned in the comments on the show, are a good way to at least get the word out. Because I think personally that a big problem with people in general understanding why these are problems is that they don't have the information. They're getting information from one side. They're getting it from some news sources that they follow. But if people hear this podcast and they hear other podcasts like this and other science podcasts and just about information in general, not necessarily even about political activism, but increasing the educational and scientific knowledge of people in the world, just leveling that up, then if we can get that into people's heads, which means when you see this on social media, share it out. We don't get any money from getting extra numbers, so it's not about that, but we like to see shares on the episodes so other people can see it, because when you have your share settings set right, then friends of friends will see it, and it could be exponential growth on at least just hearing about different things that we talk about and different things that other podcasts and science podcasts talk about. So when you see that good stuff, don't just share cat videos, please, although I'm sure those are entertaining, but share the good stuff, and let's try to help out, because I think if the 12,000 of us that Sonia mentioned can share these things out and to help out our family and friends, then again, that's exponential growth, and everybody can hear it. So anyway, I think real quick here, right at the end of our podcast, Bill mentioned doing this when we were texting about the show today, and I want to do this. So we'll give a congratulations to all recent graduates. If you happen to be listening to this, I feel like you're a step ahead of the game, because I wish I'd had something like this resource when I got out of college, when I graduated college. So congrats to recent graduates. Bill, congratulations to you. You finished up your PhD. Do you have any steps left, or is that it? Are you done? Are you Dr. White?
I'm done. I did it. I'm Dr.
Nice.
White. I finished.
Outstanding. I prefer Dr. Bill, but Dr. White sounds good too.
Dr. Bill. You want to hear a bunch of bad advice on your life? Just listen to the Dr. Bill.
The Dr. Bill Show. Coming next on the APN.
I went to a lot of the graduation ceremonies and stuff for the other students. And congratulations. It should feel great to be done with school, no matter where you're at. And no matter where you're going after this, whether you're going to start work or you're still trying to figure it out, you have made a huge accomplishment that you really should feel proud. It's no small thing to finish college. And everyone on this podcast knows it's no small thing. It takes a lot of work. So congratulations, everybody.
And I think the other important thing to note about graduating college as well is people feel like now that they graduated college, regardless of the degree, whether it's an undergrad, a master's degree, or a PhD or something like that, they feel like they are committed to that for the rest of their lives, that they can't ever make any other decisions. And these choices that they've made, whether it was their thesis or dissertation research or a focus of study in an undergrad, is like, that's it. But how many people do we know, guys, that went to college for a certain thing and now are perfectly happy doing a completely different thing 10 years later or 5 years later or whatever? You might be still paying off the bills from that education, but there was value to it in just doing it and experiencing it and practicing it, even if you tend to diverge from that. Plus, if you stay in archaeology, there's no linear path in archaeology, as Chris is saying in the background. There's any number of paths you can take, right, Bill?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Finishing school, the world is wide open now. You don't have to worry about school. The one thing that was keeping you in your place, the university, now you're free to move about. So go ahead, exercise that freedom, and congratulations.
Absolutely. And like I said, if you just graduated and you're listening to this podcast, go check out other ones. Go check out some of Bill's books. Go check out some other stuff. So you're already a step ahead of the game if you want to get out. And if you're looking for a job, head on over to arcpodnet.com/CRM-ArcPodcast. And on the right side, enter jobs in the search bar, or enter resume, or enter, networking, something like that. This is our 111th show, and we have quite a few resources. And I try to do detailed enough show notes so that those search terms actually come up in the searches. So it's a lot of really good stuff, and we're out there. We're here to help. Send in your emails. So, all right, I think that's it for this week. Thanks a lot, everybody. And again, congratulations to recent graduates, and for everybody else, go sign some Bears Ears comments during the comment period if you're listening to this in real time, and do something local to make a difference. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRM Arc Podcast. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for the episode. You can also email me at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag CRMArcPodcast, or you can tag @ArcPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to the show wherever you saw it. If you share CRM archaeology related items on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere else for that matter, be sure to use the hashtag CRMArc so the community can see and comment. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Also, please consider donating to the Archaeology Podcast Network. Your donations help fund our bandwidth and contribute to our editing costs. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.